Jacob, morning to you. We had been led to believe this was going to be closer to a 20-day recommended suspension. 90 days, 3 months. My jaw dropped, frankly. It reeks to me of spite and malice.
Well, they only did that after he'd resigned and the sanction became completely OTOs, that the only sanction they're actually imposing is to take away his former member's parliamentary pass, which I imagine will upset Boris Johnson enormously. There's no real sanction in this, and I think 90 days is merely trying to make a point. But I want to come to the details of the report, if I may, because if you look at Annex 1, the report tries to answer the questions posed by Boris Johnson on the 9th of June. And one of the points he makes was that most of the members of the committee, especially the chair, had already expressed deeply prejudicial remarks about my guilt before they had seen the evidence. They should have recused themselves. Now, Annex 1 purports to answer the questions in Boris Johnson's letter of the 9th of June. It absolutely fails to do so. It makes no mention of this. And this is fundamental because the fairness of the Procedure Committee as a committee of Parliament must follow the fairness of the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords. And you will remember the Hoffman principle, that Lord Hoffman's judgment was overturned by the House of Lords Judicial Committee because of an interest of his wife, not even his own interest, because people who are on a parliamentary committee that has a judicial or quasi-judicial role needs to be above doubt. And it is a notable omission of this report that it doesn't respond to that point made so fairly by Boris Johnson.
And Jacob, you all know that the person due to chair the Privileges Committee was the Labour MP Chris Bryant. He recused himself quite properly because he had been very public in his criticism of Boris by saying that Boris had lied or misled the Commons. Harriet Harman had done exactly the same, and she described how it was an egregious breach of the rules. How was she therefore allowed to chair the proceedings?
Well, that's absolutely right. Mr. Chris Bryant behaved absolutely properly and recused himself because he had prejudged it. Harriet Harman did not. And the problem with that is that the chairman of committees is extremely influential and important. The first draft that goes to the committee to vote on is prepared by the chairman of the committee. And that level of power, authority, of influence is one that needs to be exercised by somebody who has not judged the case before the committee. And I think this is a fundamental flaw which undermines all the work of the committee.
Jacob, I can't help but read the messages from GB News viewers and conclude that this report might have the opposite effect than what Harriet Harman might have intended. So, for instance, Dawn has got in touch and she says, "This is a witch hunt. I'm so angry. Never again will my husband and I vote Conservative unless Boris Johnson is there to become Prime Minister."
I think if you look back over the history of Parliament, Parliament sometimes makes a great mistake when it tries to stand on its dignity. In the old days, people who said disobliging things about Parliament were summoned to the bar of the House. They last did this with John Junor in the 1950s when he accused members of fiddling their petrol allowances. The House of Commons made itself, in its righteousness, look foolish. And I think that this report is in danger of making the House of Commons look foolish.
I think, I'm just checking, Andrew Roberts, you know very well, Lord Andrew Roberts, the historian, said she on three occasions on one day accused Boris Johnson last year of misleading the Commons. So perhaps it's legitimate for Boris to say it's a kangaroo court, and yet that criticism has led to them upping the ante to 90 days ban if he was still an MP.
Well, I think the House of Commons is always in difficult territory when it criticises freedom of speech and tries to say that you must not criticise what politicians are doing. And bear in mind that Harriet Harman is a senior Labour politician. It is completely routine for senior Labour politicians to criticise Conservatives and vice versa. That is what happens in our adversarial political system. And suddenly to say that because it's a committee of the House that those criticisms can't be made doesn't make any sense. Can you not criticise a committee on transport that comes up with a recommendation you don't like?
Jacob, you know Boris Johnson fairly well. With one sort of eye on his mindset, What will he be thinking now? Will he be going away from politics, as was presumably the intent of this report, or will he be girding his loins to come back stronger in some future iteration?
I mean, that's a very good question. I think his options are very much open to him, that he remains a very popular figure in the Conservative Party and on the right of politics. He has an extraordinary connection with voters that other politicians can only dream of. And I think many associations in the country where a member is standing down would welcome him as their candidate with open arms. So I think his options are very much open. And he remains the biggest figure in British politics, doesn't he? Look at College Green, where I am now. All the cameras are out. Everybody's fascinated because it's about Boris. He is a big fish.
The language he's used in his response, Jacob, is very Boris. He's called the statement tripe. He's called it deranged. That is a sign, isn't it, of just how angry he is. Geeta Harry, who's his former spin doctor, writing in my paper, the Daily Mail today, saying he is absolutely enraged by the way he says he's been treated by this committee.
Well, I think he does feel very badly treated. There's one example that the committee comes to the conclusion that he must have thought something when he was doing something.
Yes.
Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's ever possible to assume what people must have thought during the course of a busy day. So they say he must have noticed when he was going upstairs that something was happening in a different room.
That's right.
They weren't there, they didn't see it, they don't know what was visible. It is pure speculation on behalf of the committee, as if they've got Elon Musk's chip and have put it into Boris's mind to try and work out what he was thinking some time ago.
It's the Mystic Meg moment, Jacob, of the report.
It's an extraordinary part of the report. Also, I was leader of the House at the time, and one of the things the report concentrates on is the line to take. Was Boris really told that the line to take was that the rules were followed at all times? And I know that it was, because as leader of the House, for business questions, you get the briefing pack for PMQs the day before, and your own briefing on top of it. I was told, as leader of the House, that if this came up, my answer was that the rules were followed at all times. That was the government line. It was the line given to the Prime Minister, and he repeated it. If you can't rely on official...
But Jacob, was that advice from officials? Was that from officials, that advice?
Yes, it was from officials. That was from officials. That was the advice that went from Downing Street to the leader's office, and I was told absolutely categorically that if somebody asked me about this, my answer was to be that the rules were followed at all times, and the all times was emphasised to me. I can recall it so clearly sitting in my office being told this before business questions.
What next, Jacob, for Boris, do you think?
Well, he remains a very big figure. As I was saying, that's why we're all discussing him today. I think his options are very open. He dominates the airwaves in a way other politicians go slightly green about the gills over.
Can I ask you whether it's entirely coincidental, do you think, that Rishi Sunak this morning has done a very powerful photo call with the police wearing a stab vest on the day that Boris Johnson gets found guilty by the Privileges Committee?
No, I think you're being much too cynical for once. I think that is a routine prime ministerial engagement, and particularly after the terrible events in Nottingham, I'm not surprised that the Prime Minister wants to be doing something that is very strongly supporting the police.
OK, all right, thank you.
Can I just ask you finally one question? He's no longer an MP. There will be a general election almost certainly next year, Jacob. Do you think Boris Johnson will be deployed by Rishi Sunak for what he is, a formidable election winner, campaigning perhaps in the Red Wall, or do you think Rishi Sunak will want him hidden from public view?
Rishi Sunak is a sensible man. He will want Boris absolutely to the fore, particularly in the Red Wall. Boris is a campaigner without parallel.